Looks like that. Look at that. We're, I
Hello.
think, ready to go.
Yeah, perfect. Good afternoon, good day, good morning to you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, sorry about that. I think Twitter, or I guess X, is just having a lot of problems with connecting.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, we've been bitten by this bug multiple times, but you figured it out. All the engineers get out of the car, turn it off, get back in, and it will work, right? It's something about a computer joke in there, I'm sure. Well,
Yeah.
good day to everyone listening here. This is Ken. I'm pleased to be joined by two special guests here. The first one here is Arjun with Connects Network. Welcome, Arjun.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
And you might also see up here on the stage with us is Patches, one of the rocket scientists and well known in the rocket pool community here, who will be stepping in for Joe a little bit on this call. Welcome, Patches.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
And as you heard later on in the run up here, Mav is with us, but will be off mic for most of it as he's feeling a little under the weather. Is going to let his voice rest a little bit, but we'll save him for the bread at the end of the call here. But let's start with Connects Network. I understand that Connects is a decentralized peer-to-peer communication and payments protocol between Ethereum compatible smart contracts and layer twos. But beyond that, I don't know much about it. So Arjun, can you start us off and maybe start a little bit just by introducing yourself and a little bit about what Connects is?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Arjun. I'm one of the founders of Connext. I've been building infrastructure in this space since 2016. I joined Ethereum or started building on top of Ethereum because I was just really interested in figuring out ways to build globally decentralized, totally sovereign public goods, like things that look like the internet, but that go beyond just simply transferring information and towards like more sophisticated mechanisms to like coordinate human beings around the world. We started Connext in 2017, so it's been about 6 years now, which is pretty awesome. It's kind of crazy to think that's been that long. Connext was one of the first like scalability infrastructure projects in this space. We were an R&D focused organization that we actually built one of the first L2s on Ethereum. It was like a scalable payment network that was integrated into MetaMask and integrated with Maker and a bunch of other things. Now, Ethereum overall obviously went in a somewhat different direction towards things like DeFi rather than payments, and the payments market actually is only just now starting to become a thing. And so in 2020, we kind of realized that there was we were seeing like scalability as a question was sort of heading in the direction of things like rollups and looking more and more like the L2 world that we see today. And so we and a lot of our friends were kind of building those L2 systems. And so we realized that there was this new problem that everybody was going to be dealing with, which was just how do you actually communicate between the L2s? So like what happens when people are using multiple different L2s? They now have to think about, okay, how do I get my rETH from Optimism to Arbitrum? Or how do I'm using an app that's on Polygon, but all of my gas money is somewhere else. Or other more like interesting complex constructions as we've started to see these days. For us, that's been like pretty much the biggest thing that we've been focused on since about 2021. We built one of the first like bridges in the space, and then since then have been like really focused on trying to find the right way to do cross-chain communication of all kinds in a more generalized format, especially between rollups. And the kind of quintessential challenge here is that it is really difficult to do. It is difficult in general to solve this problem, but and a lot of projects solve it by just introducing like a set of validators or a multisig or something like that between two chains. But what we've been interested in doing is figuring out how to make it possible for like a rollup to speak to another rollup, or an application on a rollup to speak to an application on another rollup in a way where you're not fundamentally taking any trade-offs in terms of security at all whatsoever. You're actually using the rollup's own security mechanism to power communication that goes between chains. And so that's something that we believe that we've cracked. We've been live with the latest iteration of our network for the better part of a year. That does enable this kind of communication across chains, and we've slowly been kind of like expanding the scale of it and working towards like now focusing on more and more use cases. One of those use cases being the topic of this space, which will be XERC20.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good segue in here. I did a little bit of research looking on the website and kind of understanding that cross-chain communication pathway. But how does it integrate with Rocket Pool? What brings you here today?
Yeah. So I think there's cross-chain stuff is obviously this like really big like puzzle, and token bridging is really one very small piece of it. But token bridging is also kind of like the quintessential use case, right? Like it is really like the first thing that people started doing on blockchains was sending token transfers around, and it is really the first thing that people have done across chains as well. And yet, even now, we still haven't really gotten it right. And there's a bunch of different reasons for why that's the case. So like when you think about bridging a token, obviously everybody has like slightly different conceptions of what this means, but in order to bridge a token between chains, you need to have someone go and mint a representation of that token on another chain. So for example, let's take Rocket Pool ETH for instance. When you take rETH and you take it from Ethereum and you want it to be available on Optimism, you need someone to go and mint a representation of rETH on Optimism. And right now, the canonical way to do that, the official way to do that, is to do that through the official Optimism bridge. And what happens if either no canonical bridge exists, or if that canonical bridge has limitations? So in Optimism's case, of course, transferring that rETH out means having to wait like a full 7 days, which is obviously like terrible user experience. Well, then as a project, you end up in one of two places. As a token issuer is kind of what we say. It's a person that's kind of creating a token that wants to be bridged across chains. So you end up basically with one of two solutions. You either go and work with existing liquidity bridges like Connext, and this is something that we've been doing for a while. You either go and work with existing liquidity bridges like Connext, and you basically have them go and build liquidity in rETH in order to make it possible to do a fast transfer of rETH from L2 to L1 and from L2 to L2. Or you go and you work with like a mint and burn bridge that goes and mints its own representation of rETH. So for example, like multi-rETH for multi-chain, or AXL rETH for Axelar, or I guess I'm not really sure what Layer 0 calls their OFT ones, but something like that for OFTs. Now there's trade-offs to both of these approaches. So in the first case, you basically have a liquidity overhead. You have to basically, you as like Rocket Pool, or really any project, has to go and bootstrap liquidity for your token on each different bridge that you want to support it. And so not only is this like a cost to DAOs, but in addition to that, this doesn't really scale very well. So like if you want to work towards a model where people are transferring around like very significant amounts of like a given token at any time, then no matter what happens, you're going to face very high slippage across chains. It also doesn't scale horizontally. So like as we're starting to move into a world where there are now dozens of rollups, soon there will likely be hundreds. And the goal is that eventually, we want to work in this like seamless interchain world. And you can expect that like there will eventually, once we finish onboarding the world's population, be many thousands of rollups out there, especially, tailored to their own specific use cases and ecosystems, but there will be. And in that world, how do you, there's this enormous challenge that you then face of having to go and build rETH liquidity on each chain. And then the last kind of like trade-off there is that, slippage brings about a lot of complexity as well. So for example, if you want to build some sort of cross-chain experience that involves rETH, it becomes harder to figure out how to actually make that happen. You transfer the rETH across chains, but you don't really know how much you're going to receive on the destination, because just like a Uniswap swap, you don't actually have any way to be sure of how much slippage you're going to get when the transaction executes. But then the other model is also kind of problematic. So like, I think a lot of folks here have likely seen, what's happened in a lot of the chains that are out there that haven't had a canonical bridge. So for example, chains like Moonbeam, where they kind of decided not to go with having, at least initially when they first launched, decided to not go with having any specific bridge. And so what ended up happening inevitably was that like every single token suddenly had 6 or 7 different representations, different flavors that were completely incompatible with one another. That, of course, is also an additional user experience nightmare. And so like as a project, you're kind of in this like rock and a hard place. So you either like lock yourself into one option, and you work with only one of the like messaging bridge protocols, like layer 0 or something like that. Lock yourself into that model forever because you don't want to have to like deal with multiple different flavors of your tokens, or you have to go and build a lot of liquidity, or you just bite the bullet and say, okay, you know what? Our token is not going to be able to be transferable easily across chains. We're going to just never have it really exist on L2s. And at least from our perspective, we think that all of those options don't really make sense. Like people need to have tokens on multiple different chains. This is like a very quintessential part of what DeFi needs in order to operate. And as we move towards more chains, this problem just gets more and more hairy. XERC20 is technically the only solution to this problem, at least as far as we can tell. And the solution is not too complex. It basically does three things. One, the first thing that XERC20 does is it observes that right now in the current model, regardless of whether you're bridging from Ethereum to Optimism using the Optimism canonical bridge, or you work with like multi-chain or layer 0 or Axelar or Chainlink or whatever to like bridge your token through them, in either of those cases, it isn't Rocket Pool that owns the token implementation on Optimism. It's the bridge. The canonical bridge or one of these third-party bridges is the one that actually mints the representation of like rETH and fully owns that contract. And so if something goes wrong, I mean, of course, in the canonical bridge case, something going wrong means like the whole rollup, there's something going wrong with the whole rollup. So in that case, you're probably okay. But with the third-party bridge, if something goes wrong, there's really nothing you can do. There's no way to actually switch off from that approach. And then the flip side of that is that you as a token issuer, as a DAO, and really this applies to really any token issuers, you don't have the flexibility to decide, okay, well, where you don't really own the actual token itself and have the flexibility to decide, okay, like which bridge am I even working with in the first place? So that's kind of the first problem. Is like the first thing that the XERC20 does is it says token issuers should be sovereign. Tokens should not be owned by bridges at all. They should be owned by the token issuers themselves, because fundamentally that's the whole point of the token issuing protocol. Your protocol should have the capacity to mint the tokens, or your DAO should have the capacity to mint the tokens and should ultimately be the decider of who can mint them. Two, you as a token issuer should be able to decide which bridges mint the token. And if you want, you should allow multiple bridges to mint the token. So you should be able to come up with a solution where you say, okay, I don't necessarily want to go and have to build a lot of liquidity for our ETH across chains. Instead, I do want to make it so that the Optimism bridge can mint our ETH, but I also want to allow Connext or Hop or like a couple of other bridges that I feel comfortable with the security model of also to be allowed to mint the token. And that, of course, brings us to point 3, which is really the kind of sticking point, which is if you allow multiple bridges to mint the same token, then there is naturally a security concern where it's like, well, what happens if one of the bridges gets compromised? Now, you're kind of aggregating the security risk of all of these bridges. And so the third thing that the XERC20 approach does is it allows you as a token issuer to implement rate limits. So you can basically limit the rate at which any given bridge that you decide to support actually mints and burns your tokens. And that's enforced within the token contract itself. And so even in the worst case of a compromise, you have a maximum amount of economic risk that you're taking when working with a bridge at all times. And this actually matters in, for example, the case like multi-chain, where like with the multi-chain hack or rug, or honestly, I actually don't really know what it ended up being. But in a case like that, there was two really bad things that happened to a lot of the projects that were working with multi-chain. We actually, a lot of them have now worked with Connext. Because they just realized how big of an issue this was and ended up realizing the need for the XERC20 approach. The two big things that they realized were, one, having multi-chain be the only minter and burner of their token meant that they had effectively like unbounded risk. So all of the funds that were in multi-chain that were minted across chains were lost. There was no way for them to limit that risk from multi-chain's perspective. And it's somewhat, so it doesn't seem as though like all of multi-chain was compromised, but if it was, then I think the outcome for these projects would have been way, way worse. And I think many of them realized that. And then two, and this is kind of the secondary sticking point, is like, even after the hack, all of these projects went through an extremely complicated process to be able to then unentangle themselves from the multi-chain system and then restart their token. Because the only way to do that, because the token had been minted by multi-chain on each chain, the only way for them to actually unentangle was to go and fully redeploy their token implementations on each chain, migrate all of their users to the new implementation, and wind down all of the old multi-chain liquidity. So, remove that from liquidity pools, like restart all of the DEX pools that they had, et cetera. Like it's a huge mess. That is the specific outcome that we are trying to avoid token issuers having to get into. It shouldn't ever be the case that you have to like fully unwind liquidity positions for any token that is actively being used. That would never, especially for something like a liquid staking token, that would just be a nightmare scenario. So yeah, I'll pause there. I know that was a lot of info, so we can jump into like any aspect of that, and happy to expand on it more.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think you did an excellent job kind of explaining a complex topic, but in a very straightforward way. And let me just see if I'm tracking here. I understand that the XERC20 product you have, it's a way to move, I suppose, ERC20 tokens, right? It's not allowing a way to wormhole or teleport through to the layer one to actually interact with a contract. You're just moving the tokens cross-chain. Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding?
You can interact with contracts if you want as well. This is basically just a primitive. So I guess there's two things there. One is it's not a product. It is a standard. So this is actually an EIP. It's EIP 7281.
Okay.
It is totally bridge agnostic. It has actually, honestly, it isn't directly tied to Connex in any way whatsoever, and doesn't disproportionately benefit us, except insofar as it just creates a more even playing field for competition, which I think benefits everybody, or at least benefits like everybody that's not benefiting from a monopoly. And then two, in this case, this is sort of a primitive. So like on top of, it's like you can use this to mint and burn a token across chains, but there's no reason why then that couldn't be coupled with Connex's existing mechanisms or any protocol's existing mechanisms to then do something with that token. So you could do things like, allow people to stake ETH from L2 and then receive rETH on L2, and like they're actually staking on the L1 Rocket Pool contracts, but all of that is happening in a single transaction. They don't ever need to know that that's happening.
Oh, interesting. So then, now let me ask kind of a forward-looking question here. I mean, obviously with Rocket Pool, we have the rETH token, and I believe it's been ported to a number of the major, like Optimism, Arbitrum, perhaps a couple other ones there that are coming to my mind right now. And so what would be your recommendation? I mean, is this something that our PDAO would get involved with in terms of using Connex to adopt the EIP 7281 standard and transition our tokens over or incorporate them with them? Like, what would you recommend as kind of the next step in evaluating a solution based on this EIP for our ETH token?
Yeah. So I think, it would look something like that. So, basically we're sort of seeking buy-in on two different things here. The first is the XERC20 approach more generally, and it is fully possible to use that approach without Connext. There's at least one project that is doing that currently. I'm sure there will be others eventually. And then separately from that, then, obviously buying into Connext, which we would we have good reasons for why to do that as well. But at this stage, what we're really interested in is just like the former. And that's something that we're super down to help with, because we understand it's like a more complex thing. How does that work mechanically? So this is something that is actually kind of part of the open conversation that I'm very interested in having with y'all, because there's a few different ways to make it work. Of course, it's always easiest if like the token is only on one chain, or if it's not deployed at all, because then you could just deploy it out of the gate as an XERC20. You don't have to worry about any of this at all. When you do have an already deployed system with an existing representation, you do have to basically work towards migrating to the standard. The good thing is that this is a definitively like a one-time migration. Once you have this migration done, now you own the token implementation on each chain. You can then choose whatever you want to do with it, and in perpetuity, you then possess the capacity. Like the Rocket Pool DAO would then possess the capacity to say, they either you want to lock into certain things forever, or you want to maintain optionality and decide how to like update your preferences over time. But that migration step largely would look, and we've done this with like Alchemix very recently, for instance. That migration step largely looks like going and deploying the new XERC20 flavor, signaling to like, you know, people on each of these chains, like DeFi protocols, et cetera, that like there needs to be a migration that happens to new thing. So you'd have to like basically migrate on UIs and things like that. And then after that, working to deprecate the legacy token. The nice thing is with the approach that we have, deprecating legacy tokens actually somewhat easier because you can use your own like treasury funds to do that rather than needing users to actually like go and you know, bridge tokens back, because we found that that is usually the like most high friction point of contact. But yeah, I can step through a little bit more of how that works if you think that's useful. It might be a little bit more abstract and technical.
Yeah, it probably is. I was saying, like, I mean, I suppose the interesting thing is, and this is, you know, one of the problems that you highlight is that as the number of L2s grow, right, folks want to hold their rETH on whatever L2 they're on, right, and they don't want to have to get it from various different sources. You know, if they see a good trade or contract, they want to, you know, let's say there's something really cool on base and they want to go interact with that with their rETH, but their rETH is over on Arbitrum. It's very difficult to cross-chain interoperability, right? You got to find a bridge, you got to move the bridge over. If there's a time delay, you got to wait for the time delay, and then you do it. So it becomes kind of an ordeal, right? And I think what you're trying to do,
absolutely, chain
abstraction, is to just be able to do whatever you want to do on whatever chain you want, and you can hold your tokens and wherever you have them, right? And so I
exactly
a strong advantage to, you know, having rETH start to look at something like that. I think our initial amount of interchain operability is just using the, you know, the canonical bridges and a few other, I think Hop Protocol had created a number of bridges for our tokens, but it does seem like this is something that maybe should be brought up to the DAO, the Rocket Pool DAO, and perhaps, I'm not sure if you're aware of the grants opportunities that come up just about every month, that, you know, it might be really good to, you know, propose an assessment to look at this and try to explain what advantages it would give, you know, what competitive advantages or user advantages it would give rETH, and at the same time try to create some context about a methodology or a risk assessment about, you know, what type of risk would we be exposed to, and, you know, what would it actually take to get some organization to the various rETH tokens on the various chains and so forth. So I would encourage you to, if you're not familiar with it, to maybe consider a grant, an application, or to start engaging the community about this. There's a number of smart individuals in there that could probably weigh the pros and cons much better than I can.
That would be awesome. Actually, that is something that, so I mean, we're obviously at a high level familiar with the process of working with DAOs, just because we have our own DAO as well. But I don't know the ins and outs of the Rocket Pool DAO. I think perhaps Max may have some more context on this. I don't know if he's on this Twitter space, but regardless, I do think this does definitely sound something like that we would be interested in, especially like the grant side, because we have teams that we work with in our ecosystem that are kind of core contributors to the protocol. So one thing to kind of state here is that Connext itself is surprisingly decentralized ecosystem made up of many different contributing teams. And that's something that it's more of a collective, and that's something that we felt very strongly about for quite a while. And I think that has the benefit of being able to like let us, you know, work with these kinds of this kind of a structure very well, where like it's easier for like one of the core contributors to Connext to just, you know, be the entity that is representing this approach and this standard in a more open capacity, and then go and apply for a grant and like be the actual execution team that goes and builds it. Even if it's not necessarily like the DAO itself that's doing it, which is kind of cool. I guess my question to you would be, how is your grants program structured? I assume you guys have cycles. And then two, who are some of the best people for us to like chat with more directly to start getting feedback on that?
Yeah, two excellent questions. On the first one, I'm very pleased to say that the grants management I serve as a member on, has made improvements that now the grants open up, I want to say almost monthly. It's, I think, about a 6-week.
Oh, it's awesome.
Week cycle in there. So I would say just you could almost start in applying at any time. And the first thing I always recommend with folks is to solicit input through the Discord. We've got a very active Discord community in there. And I would start out perhaps proposing something. I don't know the best channel, maybe Patches has a good suggestion here, but perhaps the governance channel or something like that that can create a thread. But there's numerous very devoted leaders and community members that are probably more knowledgeable about this than I am, that would start engaging with you in that conversation, or any other grant applicant on kind of the grant, and kind of work it up a little bit. And then from there, there's a process in which you then propose in the forum when the calls come out. And basically it's a rolling grant opportunity. So there's always a call open pretty much at all times.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah, I think that would be really, really fantastic.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it sounds, it's kind of interesting, a little different aspect than other ones, but it does seem that, ultimately, if you look at what is the purpose of Rocket Pool, it's to produce a liquid stake token, rETH, right? I mean, certainly it has decentralized and open source and permissionless nodes and so forth. But, at the end of the day, it produces a product, and the more value we can add to holders of rETH, that product, and if, cross-chain interoperability is one of the desired attributes that they want, I think it could be worth exploring. But
absolutely,
as we kind of reach the end of this part of the segment here, are there any other things that you haven't talked about in regards to Connects that you feel is important for our community to know about the protocol?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, I would say, there's a couple of things that really differentiates Connects from a lot of the other approaches that are out there. We haven't been as aggressive on like marketing and BD as a lot of the other projects that are out there, but a big part of the reason for that is that our focus has always been around like finding a way to build very like open public goods. I think the XERC20 approach is like probably the quintessential example of that, where this is a standard that really fundamentally just tries to push forward bridging in a way where, it fixes everybody's liquidity problems. It really massively creates like a stepwise improvement to security. And it does so in a way that doesn't really disproportionately benefit any project. However, we do think that like one of the nice things that comes out of that is that it does like create incentives for projects like, Rocket Pool, for DAOs really to like think more deeply about the security of bridges. And we think that this is a topic that is really worthwhile to double click on for the space more broadly. For us, as I mentioned earlier, like our philosophy has always been that this space really, I mean, we can find ways to kind of hack through decentralization and try to find ways to make this stuff like usable as fast as possible. And I think that that's important to do, at least to an extent. But I do think that there's, especially before we try to hit mass adoption, we do need to try to figure out how to make some like critical pieces of infrastructure like bridging actually secure. Bridging has been such a nightmare for everybody in this space for the past few years. And like, we think a big part of the reason behind that is just that a lot of the work that's been done around it has been basically taking shortcuts to try to find ways to just go to market as quickly as possible, rather than trying to build on top of some of the actual infrastructure that exists today. And from our perspective, we have like the Connects philosophy has always been that there is really battle-hardened infrastructure that is already the underpinning security behind things like rollups, right? Like the Optimism bridge, the Arbitrum bridge, the Polygon bridge, and like the rollups that are being built on top of them, they are, as well as all the other rollups that are out there, those things have been really, really aggressively tested at this point. There's, the likelihood of there being, bugs that are at least like the likelihood of there being critical vulnerabilities in them decreases as time goes on. And so from our perspective, it's beneficial for the space to rely on that infrastructure as much as possible. And that is really what is that underpins Connects' whole security model and philosophy. And so, yeah, I would say, I guess is just a kind of final point there. For us, we really, really believe in this XERC20 approach, especially for liquid staking tokens, because they're just such an important primitive, especially something like rETH. because rETH has to be everywhere. It just does. I mean, even a long tail video game rollup that gets created will potentially use rETH at some point, just because it's just an easy source of yield. And in that world, you not only need like amazing liquidity of rETH, but you also need to make sure that rETH is as secure as possible across all of the chains, because otherwise, there's just this like compounding risk that Rocket Pool faces, that your product faces. And we think that like the solution to that is to work together on this approach.
Well, excellent, Arjun. It's been a pleasure speaking to you and having you explain a little bit about the Connex network. And I, for one, learned quite a bit in the call, and I very much encourage you to continue the conversation in the Discord channels and engage with the community. It sounds like there might be a partnership opportunity here.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much, Ken. Really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. And you're, of course, welcome to stay for the rest of today's call if you like. But let me move on and welcome up to stage here, Patches. Good day, Patches.
Hey, Ken. I hope I sound okay. I'm not used to doing these calls, so I have a kind of rudimentary setup.
You sound great. For those that don't know, Joe is feeling a little under the weather today, but it's been a long time since we've had an update for the node operators on here. And Patches kindly volunteered to give us an update. So Patches, maybe tell us what you know, what Joe's been working on with this version 2.0. What is it? What does it do? When's it coming? Tell us what you know.
All right, so I don't want to go into too much detail because I haven't really been involved with the development directly. I've sort of just been talking to Joe. He bounces ideas off of me every now and then. I give him some good advice and some bad advice, I'm sure. And I'm not sure exactly what he's adopted, but I can tell you from the start, SmartNode 2.0 is essentially an enormous refactor of the SmartNode code. There's a lot of changes that have gone into it so far. I think, glancing at the diff right now, it's almost 300 files have changed in the source code, and there's about 18,000 lines of code that have been deleted and 13,000 lines of code that have been added. So it's a really very large change to the way that the SmartNode is architected under the hood. In terms of what it is supposed to do, the answer is a little bit disappointing in that when it's released, so version 2.0.0, it won't have any new features, or if it does, it'll have very small new features. The main goal is to refactor the code to make it easier to maintain, easier to build new things on top of. So essentially, the difference to a node operator when they update to 2.0 won't really be noticeable. It's what happens after 2.0 is released that's really interesting. I think one of the main things that I've been looking forward to is the way that SmartNode currently works. There's the Rocket Pool API container, which sort of most people don't even know what it does or realize that it's there, but there's a service that runs on your node called Rocket Pool API, and it's responsible for querying the beacon and execution client and collecting data. So when you run a command like Rocket Pool node status, essentially Rocket Pool API will query your beacon node and your execution client, collect information about your node, and then return that to the CLI, which displays that information. So I think the interesting thing is the way that it does that. Currently, Rocket Pool CLI, which is a program that you launch when you run Rocket Pool node status, will launch another program called Docker, which you are probably familiar with. And then Docker will access what's called a Unix socket, which is the Docker socket. And then that Unix socket is created and listened to by a service called the Docker daemon. And that daemon is what's running Rocket Pool API, and it will, in Rocket Pool API, launch another program, and that program actually goes and queries what you asked for, and then it returns it, and it bubbles back up to Rocket Pool CLI. That is a very easy way to implement what Rocket Pool API was supposed to implement. I think when Joe first did that, actually, it would probably have been Jake. When Jake first did that, it was just sort of a shortcut that they took, and it has become the only way for Rocket Pool CLI to communicate with Rocket Pool API. more traditional architecture would be to have Rocket Pool CLI talk to Rocket Pool API directly. So one of the things that Joe is working on is actually getting rid of the Rocket Pool API container, moving all of its functionality into the Rocket Pool node container, and having Rocket Pool CLI communicate directly with Rocket Pool node, not through the Docker socket. And the reason that I'm really excited for this is that it means that Rocket Pool CLI need not be the only thing that communicates with the API functionality. In the future, you'll be able to have, say, a web application that talks directly to Rocket Pool API. And I know that often requested feature from node operators is having some sort of UI that they can use to control their node. And I think once that refactor is done, we sort of unlock the potential to build UIs on top of Smart Node. So you could, control your node from a browser instead of having to use the CLI, for example.
So let me see if I'm following that. Most of the changes that Joe's working on, these foundational changes, this technical debt, right, that has to be reworked. And I get it. Jake had built this thing even before there was staking, and then others had kind of come in. So it's just been built up, and there's a lot of maybe design that in hindsight we know is not really the best way to do it, right? And so this kind of resets the foundation of the Rocket Pool smart node stack. Is that a fair assessment of it?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, and I'm glad you said technical debt. It's a term that I sometimes avoid using, but if we think about what debt means, it's sort of money that you owe and it accrues interest, so you end up owing more and more money the longer you owe money. Technical debt's very similar. You make a decision early on in the design of a program or a protocol, and that decision at the time seems like a good decision, or occasionally you'll know at the time that it is technical debt, but you just need to take a shortcut because you have more important things to work on. And then after, 6 months, a year, 2 years, however long it takes, that technical debt has accrued so much interest that it is so onerous and it's preventing you from doing something, or it's making the code harder to maintain. And the decision is to go and cut out that debt or pay that debt down, as we say. Oftentimes, paying the debt down takes longer than it would have to have just done things the right way the first time. But it's always like when you see technical debt in code, I think there's a tendency for people to be like, I can't believe so and so did this, but we don't have the same perspective now that we did when the decision was made, and you can't really cast any judgment on whoever made that decision. Their priorities may have been very different from your priorities today. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that there is technical debt in the platform, but it is a very good thing that it's being paid down.
Yeah, no, and it seems like just from node operator user here, there's a couple of things we need, and let me just ask some kind of speed round questions here. So version 2.0 doesn't bring us the GUI, but it makes it possible to build a GUI. Is that correct?
Yeah, it sort of was already possible to build a GUI. You just have to jump through a bunch of hoops, and it is easier to do the refactor first, again, so that you don't continue to accrue more and more technical debt. If you were to build a GUI on Smart Node version 1.0 or 1.11 or whatever we're on now, you would be adding to that technical debt. So later when you want to go and revert it or pay it down, you now have to also worry about this GUI that you've built and make changes there. So it will not come with a GUI, but it will mean that the decision to build a GUI is easier to make because you don't have to worry about continuing to accrue the technical debt.
Okay. And the next question, hold on to your seat so you don't fall out. Will it work on Windows?
As far as I know, Windows support is not currently planned. That is something that that Joe is keeping it top of mind. I know, because every now and then he'll ask me like, oh, if I do want to make Smart Node work on Windows, can we do it this way? And so far, I don't think we've made any big decisions that will prevent that in the future. But the cool thing about the refactor for Rocket Pool API specifically is that you'll be able to run your node on Linux or a Mac as you already can today, And in theory, you'll be able to connect to it from a Windows machine. So you'll have your node running headlessly on a Nook in your living room, say, and then you can go to your office and sit down at your desk and open a browser and control the node from your Windows machine in your office.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. That's in my mind. That's almost as good as running it on Windows, right? And a couple other questions here. When 2.0? I know these time estimates are always difficult, and I always double whatever number a developer gives me. But how much work are you thinking on this thing is needed? Is this something before or after Houston, after Cancun? Sometime.
I can't really tell you before or after Houston, but looking at the code, I can tell you that Joe's very far along already.
Excellent. And then last question, maybe you can tell us. I know you're kind of a free agent now, and it sounds like you're kind of excited about this. Does that mean you're going to be doing work on this client, or is this just a hobby for you?
This continues to be a hobby for me. There are some things that I'm excited to work on. They're not going to make it into 2.0, but Joe has expressed an interest in adding them later. I'm actually working on a project right now that uses code generation techniques to essentially replace the Rocket Pool Go repository, which is a package that is a Golang library for communicating with an Ethereum beacon node and execution client to sort of abstract away all of the information that you would need to do anything pertaining to Rocket Pool. So it's just a bunch of functions that say, fetch every registered node or fetch every mini pool, stuff like that. That's one of my upcoming projects, and it was inspired at least by Joe's work on Rocket Pool 2 or SmartNode 2.0 because we got into a long conversation about deduplicating some of the logic in Rocket Pool Go, and I realized there was an opportunity to develop a library that made that much simpler.
Well, awesome. Well, anything you build and work on, I'm always a big fan. Patches, I know must be well too. So I'm absolutely ecstatic to see that you're doing something here in the Rocket Pool area with your time, and I'd love to be able to support that however I can. So yeah, have fun with it here.
I am having nothing but fun. I actually, before we end this segment, I would like to say that one of the other things I'm really looking forward to in SmartNode 2.0 is a better wallet abstraction. I believe Joe is working on, or at least making it so that SmartNode doesn't assume that it has the keys on hand all the time, which would potentially unlock future work so that you could use a hardware wallet as your node wallet, or something along those lines, which I think is really cool.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's quite exciting. I'm looking forward to see that develop out a little bit more. I certainly invite you to kind of continue to stay on here as we talk about some other things. And Mav, if you're still with us, maybe just quickly a little bit here, especially with Patches on. The roadmap ahead in Houston. Do you have any news about Houston in terms of what the team is thinking? I know you're working concurrently both on aspects for both Houston and Saturn, but anything you can share with us about the two kind of planned releases coming up?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, got you loud and clear.
All right, great. So in terms of, I guess, almost a bigger picture around announcements, we have gotten to the point where there's a few things due in terms of roadmap, Medium articles, new website, things along those lines. And on a previous call, it might have been the last one we had together, or the one before that from Singapore, I shared a little bit about my plans in terms of quote unquote marketing or the kind of opportunities with some of these refreshed brand assets to do a bit more, say, content creation, as much as Rocket Pool is already over Twitter and various social platforms to kind of amplify that a little bit more. So from a marketing perspective, I do see some value in coordinating things. Obviously, we have Istanbul coming up pretty soon. In fact, based on the flights that we're looking at, people will be starting to fly out of Brisbane in like literally just over a month's time, so it's very soon. And in a perfect world, I would like to coordinate some of this content as far as what you were talking about around Houston and looking forward to Saturn and future upgrades around Istanbul, given that it will be a pretty significant event or series of events for the staking world in particular, with the staking rewards staking summit up first, and then the ETH staking gathering a little bit later, and then various other Dev Connect events. So that is my kind of view and perspective. It may not be the case that we can have everything ready to go in terms of like announcements and articles to coordinate it perfectly, but I think that makes for a pretty good kind of peg in the sand, as it were, to plan around. So at the risk of sounding like a repeating soon TM, that's my thoughts on the matter. In terms of the kind of specifics, again, it would probably be best to revisit this with Joe Langers on the call. But regardless, if people aren't aware, audits are booked in for not long after Assemble is finished up. So that's also another peg in the sand for Houston. That is not something that can just be pushed out once these audits are booked, given that we only work with very not only very reputable auditors, but individuals within these companies. They're not people that you can just call up and book in next week. It kind of speaks to a bit of a, I suppose, increase in activity going into next month, and along with that, a lot more news coming out on these pretty exciting topics. As kind of Patches alluded to earlier, at least from the smart node side, from what's visible, Joe seems to be making a lot of good progress. I'm not going to pretend that I can comment on that or the lack thereof, but I do know the guys have been busy building away and kind of getting to the point where it starts to fall back to the best way to get the word out. My view on that would be to have things coordinated around Istanbul. So, yeah, hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, maybe it does. I think I picked up listening to Jasper's call last week that they had some contract, at least one contract out for a dev hire, but no announcement as to who that is or when they onboard yet. Is that correct?
So there is one, the main dev hire has essentially been confirmed. It's basically just waiting on paperwork, as it were. I have recently found out who it is. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to share that, unfortunately, on this call. That's not up to me. And you never know how these things can potentially fall apart at the 11th hour for whatever reason. Not saying that I'm expecting that to happen, but it will be announced in due time as part of the process. And the topic of a second junior dev, for all the jokes that go down in training and trading is still on the cards, but that is certainly not nearly as advanced. I'm not quite sure if there is a selection, or if the selection process has kind of been finalized, or if it's ongoing. Also going into what's going to be a pretty busy month, this may be something that kind of gets pushed out to the other side. So yeah, again, another soon, but progress slowly being made there.
Okay, well, we're trying to put the pieces together here in trading as you're talking there. So sounds like at least one good dev coming on board, and then possibly a second junior dev. to add on, maybe. Huh? And then I've heard a little bit of the rumors of the website. I heard that they had shared a kind of a preview of it with the rocket scientist to provide some comments on. When will the rest of the community get to look at it? When does it launch? Is that something you're holding back on for Istanbul, or could it come out earlier? Or when? What can the community know about the new website?
Certainly not being held back for Istanbul. I guess probably more accurately, frantically working on to release sometime around Istanbul, whether it's, even possible to do it in Istanbul or slightly thereafter or slightly before. But that is kind of the reference point. Sorry, was there another part to your question?
No.
Okay, yeah.
the next one for it, but soon, okay, because we're just all so excited about that. And Houston, you alluded to that the auditors are reserved for shortly after Istanbul, so late November, mid-December, I'm guessing. Is that a fair?
Yeah, it's mid/late second half of November. So,
Okay.
um,
And what do they look at? Just the Houston code, right?
yes, that's right. But also, just to jump back, I remembered what I was going to say about the website. Yes, there have been some elements slowly kind of sent out in a very targeted manner for feedback. No leaks yet, thankfully. That will kind of continue to grow over time, and then obviously we will get some, I suppose, official sneak peeks in terms of a bit of a tease shortly before the eventual launch. I think I said before, back earlier on, when this process kicked off, I think it was towards the beginning of the year. I'm a fan of how it's turned out. Certainly less orange, but obviously still there, being pretty prominent color for the protocol. And there will always be 101 different opinions on this kind of change. But I hope overall it will satisfy a lot of the feedback that's kind of been given over the months and years.
Okay. And then you alluded to the Medium article too. That's kind of going to be launched as part of your marketing blitz over Istanbul. Is that kind of the timing here? So in the next 30 days on that?
Yeah, that's the Langers and Dave magnum opus that they've kind of been collaborating on to put together, similar to what we had for Atlas and Redstone before it.
Okay, and I'll still keep you on the hot seat here just for a little bit to talk about DevConnect, right? This is Istanbul, right? And it's actually, I guess, a series of two conferences. There's I guess it's a company that's putting it together called Staking Summit. If you haven't taken a look at their website, it's stakingrewards.com. It seems to be a kind of a for-profit entity that brings together a number of protocols as well as staking firms, staking protocols. And last year they did a conference in, I think it was in Lisbon, and a number of folks afterwards just commented very, very highly of it. And so this year I'm looking forward to attending it. It's actually the Thursday, or maybe it's the Friday and Saturday, or the Thursday and Friday. It's November 10th and 11th, whatever days those are, that just precede DevConnect. And Mav, am I understanding that the team is attending that, and who from the team is going, and kind of tell me what the team hopes to learn from that part of Istanbul, the Staking Summit?
So yes, we have a slightly smaller contingent than Singapore. It is a little bit further, quite a bit further to fly from Australia, more than twice the distance, and obviously the cost and the time increase alongside that. At this stage, it's looking like a departure kind of evening of the 8th of November. And then by the time we kind of turn up later on the Thursday, we'll be ready to go on Friday the 10th, which is the start of the Staking Reward Summit. And that goes into the next day on the 11th. So there were a couple of sorry, start again. The team members that are attending the Staking Rewards Summit will just be attending. So similar to Token 2049, where there was no booth or sponsorship involved, we will be on site, and similar to Token, I expect. It's certainly my first time attending. I'm fairly certain the other guys haven't been to the earlier one. We will have to kind of get a feel for what it's like, but certainly if you pop over to the website and have a look through, it will certainly be kind of a who's who of the entire staking world in attendance. So great opportunities to meet with people at the venue, side kind of meetings, and do a bit of BD and networking and the like. Not sure if we're going to be in our polos or jumping back to the bright orange t-shirts to kind of stand out. But yes, probably not quite as many of us will be there. Certainly Joe will be still back in the US, and I believe Nick is unable to attend just due to scheduling conflicts. So he'll be back in Australia. And yeah, we'll have to get on to these flights. They might be even booked today. After the Staking Rewards Summit, there is a free day on the Sunday, the 12th, before DevConnect kicks off. For us, the main focus will be the ETH Staker gathering. So that's on the first 2 days of DevConnect, 13th and 14th. And both of these two events are located pretty close together, on the northern side of Istanbul. I think that's a slightly newer part of the city as opposed to kind of the old city in the south. So we'll be staying up in kind of that part, attending the ETH Staker gathering where Rocket Pool will be a sponsor, and along with that, the usual things in terms of booth, speaking. Make sure you come and say hi. We may have some t-shirt stickers, but it's always great to meet people. And I think for most of the community, most of the audience, Istanbul is slightly more accessible than Singapore. Still a little bit of a trek from the US, but it would be great to catch up with people there. And
Mav, has there been any talk? Yeah, has there been any talk about maybe doing a Rocket Pool evening or outing, or beers and burgers, or whatever the local cuisine is there in Istanbul?
Yeah, I'm sure something can be arranged. Certainly the 12th free day on the Sunday kind of makes it would be an ideal choice, because DevConnect does go on for a few days. We are unlikely to stay for the entire length of DevConnect, so we'll be heading back probably on the 16th. So something in the middle, having that spare day. Maybe it's perfect for the local version of burgers and beers, although I'm sure you can find that as well in Istanbul. I'll put out a ping shortly to get some feedback on who's going to be in town. I know you obviously will be. There are also plans for at least one or two side events. So just like in Singapore, Langers is going to pop off to, I think, Nevermind have a side event they're running, and it may be the case that another couple of us do the same. And yeah, that's going to happen on the 15th. So after the ETH Staker gathering, and after that, I think we'll be pretty much done and ready to head back on 16th. So we can a bit all up, including some travel time. Yeah, and we'll be straight back into Houston.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I would Yeah, I mean, I certainly would encourage the team to look at the Dev Connect schedule. I've noticed that there's a lot of, what I call late minute, but perhaps it's just normal that they come up 30 days ahead of time. But there's been a number of kind of protocols, wallets, layer twos, ZK protocols. As you mentioned, Netherminds has a side event. I guess Dev Connect is just a whole bunch of side events that happen all concurrently in the same city and location. That's what makes it the Dev Connect. But yeah, there's probably some really great opportunities beyond the staking conferences to go to. I feel like sometimes we're just in our own clique and our own tribe, and really, rETH being a utilitarian token and something we want to integrate, it could be a great opportunity for the team to split up and go to a whole bunch of different other events that are happening at the same time, or even if you need perhaps community members to do the same and be a ambassador for Rocket Pool, I'm sure there's going to be many of the Rocket Pool community there, and they could gladly attend some of these other events and kind of share and report back.
Yeah, the old divide and conquer strategy usually works well when it comes to these events. There's always a lot going on. You hardly believe it's still a bear market.
Yeah. No, exactly. There seems to be a lot of excitement and certainly a lot of people in attendance in there. I'd heard that they're getting more room blocks. The first ones had sold out, but if you look on the Dev Connect site, they should be releasing a number of room blocks if you haven't secured the lodging yet for those that are attending. Let me just change, as I know we're getting kind of late in the hour here, and I want to make certain you get some sleep and so forth. But maybe we just talk just a little bit about ETH Denver coming up. I know it seems far away, but it's actually in early planning. I've seen a lot of other communities start their plans for ETH Denver. Anything that you want to share with the community about ETH Denver coming up, or?
Probably a couple of main things. First of all, I'm sure everyone's shocked that we may take a little bit longer to confirm in the specifics of ETH attendance. But in saying that, overall, the intention is to essentially replicate last time. So there will be sponsorship. There will be a large booth that will still be too small for everyone. And we will plan some kind of social event with everyone who turns up. We'd love to see everyone there, and the intention is to have the entire team on site. So it'll be a great opportunity, not only to reconnect, but maybe if you're listening in, it could be your first opportunity to meet Grant or the new dev or the new junior dev or everyone. So we're certainly looking forward to it. Coming soon. Keep an eye out in Discord for more details.
Yeah, perfect. I'm getting excited and nervous that it's coming up, and excited to just start planning it. So if folks are kind of looking at it, I'd say right now start trying to secure some of your lodging for the site. Tickets are not open yet, but they should be coming open relatively soon. Usually they open up around the Thanksgiving time period. And so as in the past, if you've never attended ETH Denver, the event is free. There's tremendous amounts of side events, and you get basically the whole Ethereum community descending upon the town. So it's a lot of fun no matter where you go. So I highly promote it, and encourage you, if you haven't gone to a crypto conference, definitely consider ETH Denver as one of your first. I think you'll really enjoy it. Anything on the governance vote, Mav, that we should talk about? I did see there were a couple of test votes. I believe they were kind of in preparation for the trying to get the settings correct to kind of make a definitive vote about effective RPL and voting rights. But anything on the governance side that we should cover here on today's call?
I think this is another topic that let's bring it up on the call next week with Langers. We can go into a bit of depth onto these topics and either the voting at that point will be live or imminent, so that would make it kind of a good call to action to get people to tune in. We can kind of announce it in advance, make sure we have some pretty good attendance, because obviously when it comes to, well, most of these governance votes, but especially what's coming up in particular, pretty significant changes to the protocol, and something that people should be well informed about, and as usual, have their say, which is pretty important.
Okay, perfect. And then any other last minute items or open items that you have, Mav, or anything on the upcoming events that you want to cover with the community before we bring a conclusion to today's call?
Usually there's a plug for upcoming calls. There is one loaded into Discord now. This is not the community call. So this is another Twitter Space AMA, and we'll get some more details shortly. But just to avoid confusion, if you're looking for the community call, that will be loaded soon. We do have potentially 3, 4, or 5 penciled in. So once they're confirmed, I'll load them up and hopefully see everyone there in the future.
Well, perfect. Well, Mav, I hope you do start to feel better here and get a little bit of opportunity to go see the Big Apple in New York City and maybe some other parts in the East Coast there. I don't know if it's past the fall change there, but I've heard it's spectacular up in the Northeast. I've never seen it myself. It's on my bucket list, but hopefully you get a chance to enjoy a little bit of the U.S. before in basically 4 weeks from now you get on a plane and we'll see each other in Istanbul.
Yeah, that's the one. I heard it kind of kicks off or reaches its peak in a couple of weeks, so not sure if I will be able to get up that way. I'm sure it is pretty nice. But yeah, we'll be seeing you IRL very soon, Ken.
Yeah. Well, again, I hope you feel better. And Patches, thank you again for coming in and standing in for Joe. I think you give him a run for his money. So it's been an absolute pleasure to spend a little bit of time talking to you as well.
Yeah, anytime. Maybe next time we'll talk more about other projects that I'm working on.
Yeah, I would love to hear it. I'm sure the community will. We'd love to have you back.
Bye-bye.
All right. Have a good day, everyone. See you all back in the training channel.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.